This audiobook short story, The Little Kitten, is available on Amazon as part of an anthology of science fiction short stories, Exiles of Iron and Light, by Robert J. Fourie in both Kindle and paperback editions. This is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. This audiobook is protected by copyright law. Unauthorized copying, reproduction, or distribution of any part of this work, in any form, other than for personal listening, is strictly prohibited. Warning: this audiobook contains adult themes and strong language, intended for mature audiences.
The Little Kitten. A dark, dystopian science fiction story with a surprising twist, set in Cork. Written by Robert J. Fourie. Part 1. The 2nd of April 2060. Professor Roisín O'Connor, age 80 years and 1 day. As I approach the platform, my eyes are greeted by a hulking mass of steel and brass, a relic from some half-baked future where trains still huff and puff like they have something to prove. This one's atomic-powered, no less, because clearly we haven't learned enough from our past mistakes. The beast wheezes out clouds of steam, contributing to the already oppressive atmosphere. Wonderful. The sky looks like it could collapse at any moment, and here I am, about to board a contraption that looks like it was resurrected from the junkyard for one final death-defying performance. The pipes, cranks, and gears engage in what can only be described as a relentless mechanical brawl, clattering and clanking like they're about to have a full-blown nervous breakdown right before our eyes. Elegance? Oh, that's a concept this monstrosity has never even heard of. I spent my life searching for beauty in mathematics, where order and symmetry reign supreme, and this chaotic disaster offends every sensible instinct I have. It's as if someone took the concept of a machine, dragged it through a scrapyard, and then thought, you know what this needs? Some gaudy, grandiose designs etched into the metal to really confuse the senses. It's like someone decided to dress up a banjaxed machine in its Sunday best, slapped a bit of lipstick on a pig, and called it regal. As my late father used to say, even if you polish a turd, it's still a turd, and it still stinks. And yet, here I am with a million similes and mixed metaphors trying to tell myself that I'll be fine on this over-decorated nightmare, when clearly I won't. Is it even still fit for service? The truth is that it looks like it's just moments away from falling apart. The train cars stretch out in front of me like some sort of nightmarish, oversized snake, as if Erin Road Erin decided to dabble in horror-themed transportation. It looks like it's just waiting to unhinge its jaw and gulp me down. The windows leer down at me like a row of judgmental eyes, as if the train itself is silently questioning my life choices. But, as usual, with no other option, because choices are so last century, I step onto this beastly contraption. The carpet is so threadbare that I wouldn't be surprised if it disintegrated entirely, leaving us to tiptoe directly on the train tracks. It squelches underfoot in a way that makes me wonder if something might be growing beneath it, adding yet another layer of charm to this beauty of a ride. The seats? Well, they're about as exhausted as I feel, sagging under the weight of 1,000 weary passengers who've come before me. Each one looks like it's seen better days, probably back in the last millennium. The walls covered in rusting machinery that moans and groans with every wobble and jolt sound like they're just about ready to give up. Honestly, it feels like the whole train is holding itself together with duct tape and a desperate wish, dragging its sorry carcass along the tracks out of sheer stubbornness. Or maybe just to spite us all. The train lurches away from the station. I can feel the wheels grinding beneath me, each churn vibrating up through the floor and into my bones. The engine roars loud enough to drown out every other sound, a wall of noise that leaves no room for peace, only a persistent hum of dread rattling around in my skull. This train isn't just a mode of transportation, it's a beast, a mechanical monster dragging me unwillingly towards some grim fate I didn't choose, but I suppose being strong is the only option left to me now. Endure the horror of this journey and face whatever misery waits at the end. Easy enough, right? I confess, in my naivete, I once took my daily rituals for granted. The dark, bitter aroma of my morning coffee, the illicit conversations with my feline companion, who, by the way, the government has declared an outlaw. Because naturally, in a world crumbling to pieces, what better target for regulation than a cat? I had my mathematics, at least. Hours spent absorbed in complex equations, lost in the elegance of numbers, acting like an ostrich with its head in the sand, ignoring the bureaucratic nightmare creeping ever closer. I even swam twice a week back when that was allowed, back when the university still had a pool and a say in such trivial matters as human well-being. And let's not forget the card games with my small, loyal group of friends. I never quite appreciated how precious those simple pleasures were until they were snatched away from me, replaced by this mind-numbing, soul-sucking machine. As I sit aboard this rattling beast, I find myself reflexively counting prime numbers to stave off the creeping panic. 17, 19, 23, 27. Anything to keep the despair at bay. The world, as I knew it, has crumbled into chaos. A fact I can't escape even when I try. Climate fanatics, yes, the Righteous Brigade, have taken control of most governments, including our once peaceful Irish one. And because irony is apparently alive and well, the elderly are now labelled climate vandals and thrown onto trains like this one, carted off to who knows where. My mind instinctively tries to calculate the probability of this all being a bad dream, but the numbers aren't on my side. Ireland, despite being a place of natural beauty and simplicity, is ironically little more than a bureaucratic wasteland, buried under mountains of regulations and paperwork. Even the simplest human necessity, like toilet paper, now requires filling out enough forms to choke a shredder. A dystopian nightmare. I never thought I'd see the day, but here we are. And as the train hurtles forward, the vibrations under my feet continue to mock me, reminding me that this is all too real. How rude of me. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Roisín O'Connor, and I arrived on this earth on the 1st of April 1980. A day that has turned out to be a fitting joke on me. Today, the 2nd of April 2060, marks my 80th year and one day of existence, which apparently qualifies me for a one-way ticket aboard this fine mechanical catastrophe bound for Mallow City. Why, you ask? Because some bureaucrat with a sense of humour decided that 80 is the maximum age for property ownership. Happy birthday, Roisin. Here's an eviction notice with your cake. And no, candles are now illegal. Climate crisis and all. So, here I sit clutching an envelope and a letter I've read at least 100 times. And no, not because I'm forgetful, but because I keep hoping it will magically rewrite itself into something sane. Spoiler. It hasn't. Instead, it just confirms what I already know, that the very idea of property, that cornerstone of the law, has been yanked out from under us like a rug, and now I'm left floundering in the debris of my so-called rights. What's next? Will they start rationing air? Or maybe they'll tell us we've exceeded our carbon allowance for breathing. It's a dangerous time, they say. Dangerous, uncertain and full of surprises, none of them good. And this eco-fascist government, they've taken more than just my house. They've taken away the future, leaving me with nothing but questions I can't answer and fears I can't shake. The letter reads as follows. 1st of February 2060. Cara Dr. O'Connor, it is with great regret that we must inform you that the Irish state will be confiscating your property on the eve of your 80th birthday. As per our policy, all citizens of Munster are required to present themselves at Swaifnas na Huila Care Facility immediately after their 80th birthday. Attached herewith, please find a ticket for the train from Cork City to Swaifnas na Huila, the stop before Mallow City. Be informed that you may bring up to 60 kilograms of luggage, of which 30 kilograms will be collected a week before your departure date. It is imperative that you pack your bags with due care, as there will be no additional space for your belongings. We caution you sternly that possession of any plastic items is illegal and subject to the full prosecution of the law. Any such violation will not be taken lightly. Your property will be utilised to house climate and eco-workers who have been entrusted with the noble and never-ending task of rectifying the irreparable damage caused by climate vandals, such as yourself and others in your age cohort who either directly worked to destroy the environment or who idly stood by, while others slowly wrecked the ecosystem. Your contribution to this noble cause is highly appreciated and, of course, compulsory, in the same way that we, the youth, have, compulsorily, inherited a sick planet from you. We understand that this may cause an inconvenience to you, but your personal comfort must be sacrificed for the greater good of humanity. We trust that you will find comfort and companionship among the other climate vandals resident at Swaifnas ni Willa. Sincerely, Mr. Lorcan Murphy, Youth Minister of State Affairs. I continually return to the horrifying and rather absurd fact that the Minister of State evicting me from my home is a mere 17-year-old boy. 17, barely old enough to tie his own shoelaces, but apparently more than capable of tying the rest of us up in bureaucratic knots. I'm seated in the train compartment with two strangers, both of whom seem to have mastered the art of staring wistfully out the window, as if the lush green countryside and thriving farmhouses could somehow distract them from the slow-motion disaster that is our world, especially the bits of it that are underwater. The coastal areas might be gone, but look at all this lovely greenery, right? What a comfort. Still, silence isn't something I handle well. Throughout my life, I've found that talking to others helps me keep my mind from spinning into dangerous territory, the same way obsessively calculating prime numbers or rearranging Fibonacci sequences in my head calms me down. So, against my better judgment, I decide to break the silence. But just as I'm about to introduce myself, the man sitting opposite me leans forward slightly, nodding at me with a hint of curiosity. "Name's Padar O'Brien," he says, his voice rough around the edges but not unfriendly. "You're obviously not the type to take this lying down." I give him a small smile. "Roisín O'Connor. And you're right, I'm not exactly thrilled about the situation." Pardar's eyes flick down to the letter with the Irish harp stamped on the front, sitting on my lap. "That the eviction notice, is it?" I nod, a bitter laugh escaping before I can stop it. "Yep, my lovely birthday present from the state. 80 years old, and they decide it's time to ship me off to this place." He snorts, shaking his head. "We're all in the same boat. They make it sound like they're doing you a favour, don't they? But it's just another way to strip us of what little we've got left." I glance over at the lady sitting across from us, her delicate fingers clutching an old set of bamboo wood rosary beads. She nods demurely and says softly, "And I'm Sister Anne Coffey. I'm a Poor Clare nun, and I also received one of those horrible letters. To top it all off, my order was told that my cell would be taken over by a climate worker, or they could pay €200,000 to the state in compensation." Sister Anne offers a small, hesitant smile. "It's nice to meet you both, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Pardar chuckles darkly. "Don't we all, sister?" But it's the same old story with these folks. The government's iron fist forces everyone into line, no matter what it costs us. They think they can solve all their problems by pushing us around and stripping us of everything that matters. Anne's smile fades and she glances down at her rosary beads. I can't help but miss the quiet of the monastery. It feels strange to be out in the world like this, especially with everything that's happened. Padar leans back in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he considers her words. "Must be hard, sister." being torn away from the place you called home, all for the sake of some bureaucrat's twisted sense of order. It is, she admits, her voice soft, almost breaking. But I suppose all we can do now is pray and make the best of it. I sigh, feeling a wave of frustration and anger surge through me. Yeah, pray and keep fighting, because I'm not about to let them take away what little I've got left without a fight. Padar grins, a spark of admiration in his eyes. That's the spirit, Roisín. We might be old, but we're not done yet. Sister Anne nods, her grip on the rosary beads tightening slightly. Yes, we must stay strong, together. Sister Anne begins to speak again. I'm not accustomed to wearing civilian clothes. My community thought it would make the transition easier if I wore ordinary clothes instead of the habit of the poor Clares. Her voice trembles as she continues. Since the ecological crises began, many people came to the monastery seeking spiritual refuge. I miss my sisters, the quiet rhythms of our days and the sense of purpose I had, praying for the world, praying for the ecological disasters that plague us all. She pauses, her distress evident. I'm not ready to face the world without my community. I feel so lost. Inside, I feel a deep sorrow for this woman, torn from the life she knew and thrust into a world that seems determined to strip away everything that gave her comfort. But what can I say to ease that kind of pain? Words feel so inadequate, so I offer only a few murmured words of empathy, hoping they'll at least provide a small bit of solace in this unforgiving new reality. As the nun's words sink in, I can't help but stew in my own thoughts, simmering with a growing sense of outrage. What possible benefit could there be in tearing her away from the monastery? What kind of sick logic do these gombeen authorities use? She was tucked away, minding her own business, praying for a world that's been circling the drain for years, and now they've decided she's better off here, in this living nightmare. I'd love to give those langers a piece of my mind. Oh yes, brilliant idea, folks. Let's uproot a nun from the one place she's found peace and purpose and throw her into the chaos of a concentration camp for elders. I'm sure that will do wonders for her well-being, and while you're at it, why not rip out everyone's hearts while you're still wearing your jackboots? My anger froths up like a boiling pot, spilling over into every corner of my mind. What kind of twisted thinking leads to such injustice? The sheer unfairness of it all gnaws at me. I imagine marching up to the faceless officials who decreed this and unleashing the full force of my fury. I tell them exactly what I think of their heartless policies. You call yourselves leaders? All you've managed to lead is a parade of misery. Do you enjoy this, breaking people's lives apart, robbing them of the only thing that gives them meaning? Do you sleep better at night knowing you've done your part to turn this world into a cold, unfeeling machine? But then, with a sharp intake of breath, I force myself to calm down. I can't afford to get lost in rage, not here. I need to take deep breaths, to focus, to remember that I've got my own woes to deal with. This train ride to hell is mine too, and I need to keep my wits about me. I return to my old habit, my mental refuge, counting prime numbers. 29, 31, 37, 41, 43. The numbers flow through my mind, steadying me, grounding me. I'm no nun, but in moments like this I cling to these strings of numbers as if they were rosary beads, a mantra to keep the darkness at bay. It's absurd, I know. Most people pray for peace, and here I am, praying to the gods of arithmetic, but it works at least for a moment. For that fleeting second as I count, I feel a thread of connection to the universal laws. A brief glimmer of hope. But who am I kidding? We all know better. We're not fools. Our journey is almost over, and in just 10 minutes, we'll arrive at our place of disembarkation. Station damnation, with a side order of despair. As the locomotive grinds to a halt, I glance out the window at the platform where we're expected to disembark. The scene that greets me is one of pure, distilled melancholy. A thick layer of grime blankets everything, the platform looking like it hasn't seen a broom, much less a human touch, in years. The corroded benches, jagged and dangerous, seem to invite injury rather than rest. The fake Victorian-style lamps flicker weakly, their dim light casting eerie shadows over a landscape as barren as the government's empathy. Pardar leans closer to the window, squinting at the dismal sight before us. Lovely welcome, isn't it? Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Sister Anne gathers her things quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutches her rosary beads. It's not what I imagined, she says softly, her voice heavy with the weight of her disappointment. I prayed for something better for all of us. Pardar shakes his head, his voice laced with bitterness. Prayers or no prayers, the government doesn't care. They're too busy patting themselves on the back for this grand solution of theirs. Look at this place. It's as if they're trying to break us before we even step off the train. I nod, unable to tear my eyes away from the grimy platform. It's like they've gone out of their way to make sure we feel as unwelcome as possible. They could at least pretend they're doing us a favour. Sister Anne tries to muster a smile, but it falters. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. Sometimes things aren't what they seem. Pardar snorts, his skepticism evident. If it looks like hell and smells like hell, sister, it's probably hell. I glance over at Sister Anne, who is now fumbling with her small suitcase. Her composed demeanour is cracking, and I can see the fear creeping into her eyes. Do you need help with that, sister? I offer, trying to lend her some of the strength I'm desperately trying to hold on to myself. She nods gratefully, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, Roisín. I think I do. Pardar hauls himself up with a grunt, his joints creaking in protest. Well, let's get this over with, shall we? Not like we've got much choice. As we prepare to step off the train, the flickering lamps outside cast long, distorted shadows on the platform, making everything seem even more menacing. I steel myself, taking a deep breath, and remind myself that whatever awaits us out there, we'll face it together. Even if it feels like the world has left us behind, at least we have each other. For now. I take another deep breath and step off the train. My soft satin pumps sink into the cracked concrete, which feels like it's giving way beneath me, much like everything else in this God-forsaken world. But as soon as my foot touches the ground, something strange happens. My vision blurs for a moment, and then I see them. Mathematical equations, graphs and symbols swirling around me in a chaotic dance of colour and light. They overlay the grim scene before me, twisting and turning in the air like some kind of surreal hallucination. Lists of prime numbers and Fibonacci sequences flash in and out of focus, each number impossibly vibrant, glowing with an intensity that makes my head spin. I've never hallucinated mathematics before. The equations and graphs swirl around the rusty signboard, around the jagged benches and flickering lamps, merging with the shadows and grime in a bizarre, disorienting spectacle. I see sine waves undulating across the platform, parabolas arching over the twisted gargoyles that leer down from the building's facade. For a brief moment, the numbers and symbols seem to mock me, as if my own mind is turning against me, layering these impossibly complex calculations over the bleak reality of my new home. It lasts only a few seconds, but it feels like an eternity. When the equations finally fade, leaving only the cold, hard reality in their wake, I'm left rattled, shaken by the strange experience. I've always used mathematics to ground myself, to make sense of a world that so often doesn't. But now it feels like my mind is rebelling, turning the very thing that should bring me comfort into something foreign and terrifying. The rusty signboard, hanging on for dear life, snaps back into focus. It displays the second-to-last stop before Mallow City in an ancient script that's as archaic as the bureaucracy that sent me here. Swaifnas ne Huila, it says, an Irish Gaelic name that means tranquility of the poets. A name so far removed from the reality that it's almost laughable. Almost. Before me stands the towering entrance of my new home, a concentration camp of iron and stone. The term care facility seems a generous term for this grotesque monument to society's neglect. Twisted gargoyles leer down from the building's facade, as if mocking us for daring to expect anything better. The iron gates creak open, not with the expected clanking noise, but with an unsettling, silent efficiency, like the machinery at a crematorium. I wonder fleetingly, will they de-louse us when we get inside? I take another shaky breath, trying to steady myself, but the echoes of those swirling numbers linger in my mind, a reminder of just how far from normal everything has become. I push the images aside, but the unease they've left behind is harder to shake. Through the barred windows, I catch glimpses of the withered forms inside, shuffling about in what can only be described as a choreographed performance of despair. The bamboo fibre flowers that dot the outside of the building aren't fooling anyone. The once vibrant colours have faded to a dreary grey, and even nature seems to have given up on this place. It's as if the world has decided that here, in this bleak corner of existence, even artificial life has no point in trying. They've stolen my home, ripped it away like some heartless thief in the night, and now they think this ugly, soulless dungeon is an adequate compensation? My home with its warmth and memories, replaced by this cold, rusting prison. It makes my skin crawl with anger. Oh, how I'd love to unleash every ounce of my fury on these soulless bureaucrats, like some vengeful witch casting a spell to bring their whole miserable system crumbling down. I'd like nothing more than to watch this place burn to the ground, reduced to ashes by the very fires of my anger. They think they can toss me in here and forget about me, just another old woman who's lost her usefulness? How dare they? My mind is a cauldron boiling over with the injustice of it all, the nerve, the absolute gall of these people. They think they can strip us of everything we've worked for, everything we've cherished, and dump us in this nightmare? If I had any real power, I'd hex the whole damn system, bring it to its knees with a curse that would echo through the halls of every sterile office they hide in. But no. All I can do is simmer in my helpless rage, feeling like I could explode at any moment. I take a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, though every fibre of my being wants to scream. I need to brace myself for what lies ahead, fully aware that whatever terrors await me inside will test every last ounce of my sanity. After all, we're climate vandals, aren't we? That's what they've branded us, like a mark of shame, and now we must face the music. Or, more accurately, the jarring din of broken dreams, malfunctioning machinery, and this twisted sense of justice they've inflicted upon us. Next, we are greeted by the welcoming party, a swarm of failed androids and rusting robots, relics from a technological era that's thankfully on its last legs. These clunky, outdated remnants clatter and wheeze as they shuffle toward us, their atomic hydrogen motors puffing out steam as if they're still trying to pretend they're relevant. The androids insist on carrying our luggage because apparently the state has decided that letting us carry our own bags at the end of our lives is just too risky. Liability, they say. One of them, a particularly insistent hunk of metal with all the charm of a malfunctioning toaster, clanks up to me. "Allow me to assist you with your baggage, ma'am," it drones, its voice dripping with mandatory politeness. "Assist?" I snap back. "You mean take." "Let's not sugarcoat it. You want my bag? Here's an idea. How about you let me handle it myself?" "Carrying your own luggage is not advisable," it replies, completely unruffled. "The risk of injury—" "Oh, spare me the lecture," I interrupt. "I've made it this far without falling apart. I think I can manage a suitcase. Why don't you go help someone who actually needs it?" "I must insist," it says, its tone never wavering. "It is mandatory for your safety." "Mandatory, is it?" I say, narrowing my eyes at the tin can. "Well, I must insist you go away and find somewhere else to shove your mandatory assistance. Somewhere dark and uncomfortable." The android pauses for a moment, as if processing my suggestion, but then its programming kicks back in. Resistance is unnecessary, it declares, and without another word, it grabs my suitcase with the robotic equivalent of a firm, polite tug. I glare at the droid, muttering under my breath, "You're lucky you're made of metal, or I'd show you just how necessary resistance really is." As I look around the station, I see the same scene playing out with dozens of other elderly passengers. They're clinging to the last scraps of their independence, their faces twisted in a mix of anxiety and stubbornness. They don't want to disembark, don't want to accept help from the robots that swarm around us like overly enthusiastic waitstaff at some poorly reviewed theme park. "Excuse me, sir, may I carry your bag?" One android chirps at an old man who's gripping his suitcase like it's the last piece of his dignity. "Get away from me, you langer!" The man huffs, yanking his bag away. "It is highly recommended." "Oh, shove your recommendations up your rubber hole," he snaps, but the robot just stands there, unflappable and annoyingly persistent. One by one, I watch as resistance crumbles. Even the most stubborn among us eventually give in, beaten down by the sheer persistence of these mechanical caretakers. They hand over control, defeated by the unrelenting politeness of machines programmed to soothe us into submission with their unnervingly calm, ever-patient voices. "Here you go, ma'am," another android says to a woman who looks like she'd rather face a firing squad than give up her suitcase. She sighs heavily, finally letting go of the handle. "Fine, take it. Just don't scratch it. It's older than you are." "Of course, ma'am," the android replies smoothly, as if it hadn't just won a small battle in the war against human dignity. I watch as the robots shuffle away with our bags, and I can't help but feel a pang of something between anger and despair. It's as if they're not just taking our luggage, they're taking the last bits of our autonomy piece by piece. And the worst part? We're letting them. Watching this unfold, I can't help but feel that we're being stripped of something essential, something that makes us who we are. These robots are more than just machines. They're the face of a system designed to take away the last bits of our humanity. Here we are, people who've lived full lives, who've made decisions, taken risks and faced challenges, now being reduced to passengers on a one-way trip to nowhere, shepherded by robots that don't even know how to smile properly. Even if my choices are few and far between, they're still mine, and I'm going to hold on to them. So, while these robots might be doing their best to turn us all into passive, docile shadows of ourselves, I'm going to keep choosing to be human, choosing to find meaning, and yes, even choosing to laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. Because if I don't, then what's the point? The station becomes a discordant din of frustrated elders arguing, protesting, and ultimately resigning themselves to their fate. It's like watching a bizarre parade of abducted children, each of them trailing after an android, heads hanging low in defeat. The androids are disturbingly good at this. You can almost hear their circuits buzzing with smugness as they herd us toward our doom. Who knows what awaits us behind these walls? Probably nothing good if the state's track record is any indication. Part 2. When I say this facility is a monstrous edifice, I'm not indulging in hyperbole. It stands as one of the largest institutional constructions ever erected in Europe. Not the largest, mind you. That dubious honour goes to the colossal facilities in Germany, where no less than 14 establishments dwarf this one in sheer size. Oh, how I envy those poor souls. Let me bore you with the grim details of the populace crammed within these walls. My assemblage of new residents, the sorry lot who disembarked from that dreadful train alongside me, numbers 111. A new milestone, apparently, as the population of this monstrosity has now swelled to a staggering 100,111 souls. That's right. Over 100,000 human beings trapped in this concrete nightmare, and here I am, just one more number in the state's grand ledger. The authorities are quite pleased with themselves for hitting this new record, as if cramming more of us into this place is something to be proud of. This facility, printed into existence by robotic concrete printers back in 2035, has ballooned in size ever since, growing like some grotesque tumour. It's amazing, really, how a building can embody all the worst characteristics of the people who built it. Allow me to give you a guided tour of the place I now have no choice but to call my home. Swaifnas na Huila is a colossal labyrinth, stretching endlessly in every direction, a maze of concrete that seems to mock the very concept of peace. The facade, once perhaps meant to inspire some sense of hope, is now stripped of any semblance of life, bleached by decades of pollution and neglect. Inside, the maze of corridors and rooms blurs into an endless procession of monotony. One hallway looks just like the next, and every door is a drab facsimile of the last. To get around this mind-numbing warren, a lanyard is required at all times, and the rules about where you're allowed to be are strict, because heaven forfend anyone finds themselves in a place they shouldn't be. The walls are a soul-sucking shade of light green, and the dim lighting casts everything in a hazy, suffocating glow. The air is thick with the scent of industrial-strength disinfectant, tinged with the unmistakable odour of elderly decay, and, of course, the faint but persistent smell of boiled cabbage. Wood and plastic? Forget about it. These days it's all bamboo and metal because they've been deemed the least environmentally impactful, as if that's any consolation. The facility itself is severely understaffed. A few exhausted caretakers flit from one end of the building to the other, overwhelmed by the sheer number of residents they're supposed to be tending to. The machines and robots that are meant to help are not quite as bad as those station porters, but they are also relics of another age, primitive, clunky, and barely functional. They grind and clatter, producing an incessant clanging that echoes through the halls like some sort of mechanical death rattle. My room, if you can even call it that, is a cramped little space, barely enough to squeeze in a bed, a tiny table and a single chair. The walls are paper thin, so I'm treated to the constant din of my neighbours' every cough, shuffle and sigh. The window, if you can call it that, is a small, sad thing that doesn't open. It offers nothing but a narrow view of the smog that shrouds the world outside. When I complained about the room, one of the android porters had the nerve to tell me I should be grateful to even have a window. In that granular, bleating voice they've all been cursed with, he added, "You should see the closet where I stand to charge and restore." It isn't a pretty picture. I look the android up and down, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, really? A closet, you say?" And here I was thinking you were recharged on a luxurious velvet chaise longue with a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. The android's head tilts slightly, processing. I do not require tea or biscuits. My charging station is 0.75 metres by 1.5 metres, constructed of steel alloy. The dimensions are standard for android models like myself. I can't resist. Steel alloy, you say? Fancy. And here I am stuck with a mattress that feels like it's stuffed with rocks and regrets. Maybe I should bunk with you in your cosy little closet. Does it have a window too? No, the android replies, its voice still as flat as ever. Charging stations are not equipped with windows. They are designed for efficiency, not comfort. I let out an exaggerated sigh. Oh, what a shame. I was really looking forward to that charming view of smog and misery. You must be so jealous of me. The android blinks, clearly confused. I do not experience jealousy. My primary functions are to assist residents and maintain operational efficiency. Operational efficiency, I repeat, nodding sagely. Well, I'm sure you're doing a fantastic job of that. Tell me, do you ever dream of something more? Perhaps a bigger closet, maybe with a nice little cushion in the corner. I do not dream, it replies, unperturbed. Dreaming is not within my range of functions. I put on a mock pout. Well, that's disappointing. I was hoping you might have aspirations, ambitions. Maybe a promotion to a room with a view or a career change to a toaster oven. The android pauses again, likely trying to match my words with its database. I am not programmed for aspirations or career changes. My functions are optimal for my current role. I chuckle, shaking my head. You really don't get sarcasm, do you? The android's head tilts once more. I am a porter. I am programmed to recognize and respond to verbal cues. However, I do not have the capacity for interpreting sarcasm. Noted, I say with a grin. Well, you're doing a bang-up job, really. Keep up the good portering in that little hot press of yours. The android, oblivious to my jabs, gives a mechanical nod. Thank you for your feedback. I will continue to operate within my optimal parameters. As it turns to leave, I can't help but laugh softly to myself. At least there's some entertainment to be had in confusing the shit out of these mechanical caretakers. The fact is, that porter fits in just perfectly here in this place. The corridors are cluttered with antiquated medical equipment, machines that look like they were dragged here from a museum exhibit on outdated technology. The pipes and wires snake along the walls and ceiling in a chaotic jumble, as if the building itself can't decide whether it wants to function or collapse. The stupid androids that roam the halls are in a state of disrepair, their joints creaking, limbs missing, held together by wires and duct tape. They bleep and whir as they stagger through their assigned tasks, their screens flashing basic instructions in that harsh, angry green light that only adds to the sense of decay. In my cohort, there are a few genuinely pleasant individuals, born under the same astrological sign, with birthdays within a day or two of mine. Each of us arrived in this world in April 1980 at Erinville Hospital in County Cork, which has since been unceremoniously shut down, with maternity procedures relocated to Cork University Hospital. One such individual is Padar O'Brien, a retired florist who lives down the hall. Padar never married, never had children, and from what I can tell, he's got that particular loneliness that comes from a life of too many empty vases. I'm in the same boat, though my vases were always filled with numbers instead of roses. Perhaps Padar will want to be my friend, but don't get the wrong idea. I'm far beyond romantic entanglements. At this age, my idea of a hot date is a cup of chamomile tea and a good algorithm. I've made friends with one of the inmates who's been here for about 4 years. Her name is Maria Hernandez Riordan, and she's one of those artistic types who's usually quiet in a group. But when you talk to her one-on-one, you discover a woman who values self-expression and authenticity. Today we're sitting together in one of the dingy common areas, her delicate, ethereal face framed by a cascade of curly dyed red hair. So, Maria, I start, trying to make conversation, how do you keep your sanity in this place? 4 years is a long time. She gives me a soft smile, her eyes distant. You find your own ways, Roisín, like making friends with the locals. I raise an eyebrow, a bit confused. Locals? You mean the other inmates, or am I missing something? Maria chuckles, the sound almost musical. Oh, not the inmates, I mean the real locals. The rats, pigeons, stray cats, and the occasional fox. They're as much a part of this place as we are. I stare at her, trying to process what she's just said. Wait, are you telling me people here are making friends with feral animals? Now I've heard everything. She nods, still smiling. At first, everyone's scared of them, of course, but over time, some of the more adventurous and lonely residents start to see them as potential companions. I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. So we've got the world's most eccentric pet owners right here, in our little facility. Maria's smile widens. Exactly. There's one man, for instance. He's taken to caring for a stray cat he named Goonie. Feeds her scraps from his meals and even made her a little bed out of old blankets. I shake my head in disbelief. And Goonie is just lapping it up, I bet. But surely that's not the strangest thing. Maria's eyes twinkle with amusement. Not by a long shot. There's a woman down the hall who's befriended a family of rats. She's named them after her children. Mickey, Minnie, the whole gang. Every morning she leaves out bits of bread and cheese for them, talks to them like they're people. "Morning, Mickey," she says in this sweet, whispery voice. "Here's your breakfast. Don't be so grumpy, Minnie. Here's a biscuit for you." I cover my mouth to stifle a laugh, picturing the scene. Rats as surrogate children. Now I've truly heard it all. Maria shrugs, her expression turning a bit more serious. It might sound strange, but it gives them a sense of purpose, some joy. They've even formed a little community of animal lovers. They share tips, stories about their furry companions. It's their small rebellion against this dreary, institutional environment. I nod slowly, trying to wrap my head around it. A rebellion of rats and pigeons? You know, Maria. I might just have to join this little resistance. I'll have to start looking out for my own furry friend. She laughs, a light, genuine sound that seems to brighten the dull room. You might just find one, Roisín, or they might find you. Now, let me tell you about the orientation they subject us to. And by orientation, I mean the psychological warfare delivered by one Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan, the so-called authority figure in this house of horrors. She may only be the leader of Lambda 56, but you'd swear she thinks she's the CEO of the entire facility, strutting around as if she owns the place. Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan, if I can even call her a doctor without cringing, is painfully young and unfortunately blessed with a face that could have landed her the role of the villain in one of those old, low-budget horror movies. The kind where the audience is yelling, "Don't go into the basement," but the clueless heroine goes anyway. And, as if her mere presence weren't enough to send shivers down my spine, she's flanked by two towering security androids that look like they've been plucked straight from a cheap 1960s sci-fi flick. You know the kind, shiny, stiff, and utterly unconvincing, like someone's bad idea of what robots are supposed to look like. These mechanical goons are clearly there to intimidate us poor inmates and lend her an air of gravitas and authority. It's almost sweet, really, how these towering tin-pot bodyguards are supposed to make her look more important. I can't help but feel a little sorry for her, trying so hard to play the big, bad boss with these outdated metal giants by her side. Bless her heart, she's really giving it her best shot. But all I can think is that she and her tin soldiers would be more at home in a rerun of The Twilight Zone than in a place like this. She's got an upturned nose that seems to constantly twitch in disdain and glasses that slide down that ridiculous nose at every opportunity. Her small, beady eyes dart around like she's trying to catch you in some unspoken crime, and her smile, if you can call it that, could curdle low-fat oat milk. Her voice is a grating, nasal monotone, dripping with condescension, like she's constantly suppressing the urge to tell us how lucky we are to be here. Her mannerisms are as infuriating as they are unsettling. She constantly pushes up those damn glasses as if she's adjusting a crown, and every time she sneers, I swear I can see the devil himself nodding in approval. I half expect her to start twirling an imaginary moustache as she informs us that, henceforth, sexual activity among residents will be firmly discouraged. We don't want to deal with the resource implications of STDs in the elderly, she drones on, as if she's announcing the weather report. I'm so stunned my jaw nearly hits the floor. I'm past all that now, of course, but the sheer audacity. If I ever did feel like a bit of romance, no government ghoul is going to tell me when or when not to indulge. I have half a mind to knock that smug bamboo clipboard right out of her clammy little hands. But I don't. I really should, though, because you won't believe what she says next. This facility will never have more residents than it does now, she declares, her voice dripping with something far too sinister for someone so young. The authorities have decided it has reached a steady state. I assume that means the rate of natural deaths will finally match the number of incoming residents, and we could at least hope for some sort of macabre equilibrium. But, as usual, I'm only partially right. Pada, bless his naive little heart, raises his hand and asks her, "Do you mean you will no longer take on new residents? Will they be going to another facility?" Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan's scowl deepens. She shoves her glasses back up her upturned little nose, and fixes us with a look that could peel paint. "No, you climate vandals will find out soon enough," she hisses, her words as cold and final as a guillotine's blade. A chill runs through me, and I can see the same shiver ripple through the rest of the group. Her lips curl into that grotesque smile again. The kind of smile that makes you check for hidden knives, and then she spins on her heel and leads us toward the refectory in section Lambda 56. We just stand there, a little stunned, trying to process the depths of her malevolence. "Come now, kids," she coos, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We don't have all day." I can feel my mind starting to spiral into panic, so I do what I always do. I escape into numbers. Prime numbers, to be exact. 2, 3, 5, 7. I start adding them, multiplying them, subtracting them from each other. 7 minus 5 is 2. 3 times 5 is 15. My brain latches onto these calculations like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. I know exactly what I'm doing, trying to distract myself from the horror show in front of me, but that doesn't make it any less effective. Even as her voice continues to drone in my ears, I keep counting, keep calculating. 11 plus 13 is 24. 24 minus 17 is 7. A nice, simple 7. A prime number, thank you very much. It's ridiculous, but I can't stop. It's the only way to drown out her voice, her face, that hideous smile. If I keep counting, maybe I won't have to think about what steady state really means. But no matter how much I try, I can still hear her. That droning, nasty voice worming its way into my thoughts, even as I subtract 19 from 23. And despite my best efforts, I can't escape the terrible realization. This woman, this thing is in charge of my fate now. Writing this isn't easy, but somehow, putting it all down helps me feel like I'm regaining some small measure of control. It's a trick I've always relied on. When the world is too chaotic, reduce it to numbers, to words, to something manageable. And now, with the reality of this place documented, it's time for lunch. Part 3. I am almost disinclined to describe the food here because it's nothing to write home about, but I will, just for the sake of completion. There are 50 dining halls in the entire facility, each with a capacity of 1,000 seats. Half of the sections eat during the A shift, and the other half eat during the B shift. We're stuck in section Lambda 56, but the residents from Lambda 55 use our dining hall in the B shift. Maria tells me that this arrangement benefits us unfairly because if the dining hall runs out of provisions, it's more likely the B shift residents who will go without. A small consolation, I suppose, but hardly one worth celebrating. Today, we have the dubious pleasure of being served seafood medley. This supposedly healthy and eco-friendly meal is meant to include a range of seafood flavors made from biosynthesized proteins. To me, it's nothing more than a gelatinous, fishy mess. I can't distinguish the so-called crab cakes, made from lab-grown crustacean meat, from the tuna salad they claim is made from cultivated fish cells. It all just melds together in one apathetic, flavorless blob on my plate. Maria takes one look at her plate and sighs. "I think my plate's trying to tell me something," she says, poking at the synthetic seafood with her fork. "Probably something like, 'Run while you still can.'" I grimace as I try to identify the scallopy chunks that have been synthesized from plant-based proteins. Served lukewarm, they resemble something too abjectly unmentionable to eat. If the facility's goal is to starve us, I'd say they're doing a fantastic job, I mutter, trying and failing to choke down a bite. Maria nods in agreement. Salad greens are supposedly nutrient-dense and colourful, originating from vertical farms, but in reality, by the time they reach our plates, they're mostly wilted, spongy, or already fermenting. She rolls her eyes dramatically. I frown, leaning in a little closer. Is it really that bad? "Oh, it's worse," Maria replies, nodding vigorously. "My personal pet peeve is the half-ripe pink tomatoes. They're so tasteless they could double as rubber balls. And don't even get me started on the lettuce. It's more like a wilted suggestion of lettuce, fit for swine, really." The culprit behind this smorgasbord of gustatory delights is the android chef, Suspot56. Maria says he's constantly malfunctioning, often substituting salt for bicarbonate or throwing in too much chili, which makes the food just about inedible. The seafood medley is a rare treat, Maria says, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Usually we get a daily serving of greyish rubbery conglomerate. They call it a fungus-based meatloaf, but I'm convinced it's just recycled misery. I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Do they at least serve a decent spud? Spuds? Maria chuckles, shaking her head. The closest you'll come to a spud here is the mashed potato they serve on Sundays. And by mashed potato, I mean a lumpy gruel that's usually topped with a cold skin and drowned in a translucent thin gravy. That's your spud. I poke at the gelatinous mess on my plate again, wondering if it's even worth the effort. I wouldn't be surprised if malnutrition is the leading cause of death in this facility, I say half-jokingly. Not just death, Maria quips, but death by 1,000 tasteless bites. I guess when you get to our age, your taste buds start malfunctioning. But even so, there's only so much gerontade can do. Some folks think it's a placebo, but I'm convinced it works. Though, with food like this, you start to question whether immortality is really worth it. Not one of us octogenarians looks a day over 40, which makes the whole situation even more surreal. Here we are. Young-looking, but frail. Forced to endure this gastronomic torture. The irony is as thick as the sludge they call gravy. To distract myself from the horror on my plate, I retreat into the safety of numbers yet again. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences. I dive in head first. Let's see, 89 minus 83 is 6. 6, a non-prime number, but oddly satisfying. Then 13 plus 21, that's 34. Fibonacci, thank you very much. 89 plus 233 is 322. Wait, not a prime, but let's multiply it by 2. No, make that 4. Anything to keep my mind off whatever rotten, sinister ingredient is lurking in this so-called meal. If only you could eat numbers. I wonder what 11 would taste like. I'm perfectly aware that I'm using these absurd calculations to distract myself, but honestly, what else is there to do when faced with food that might actually be plotting against you? 15972584, both Fibonacci, mind you, plus 4096, and... what does that even equal? Who cares? At least it's better than contemplating the origins of that metallic tang in my soup. Maria looks up from her plate. We all complain, but, of course, it's like shouting into the void. Stomach issues, malnutrition, it's all par for the course here, especially when the gerontar medication increases our appetites to the point where even this muck looks somewhat edible. It's a sorry affair, this whole damned facility. Honestly, the place needs a bomb under it, and I'm not even joking. After our thrilling orientation to the institution, we are promptly instructed to report for our compulsory medical examination. My heart sinks with dread, for I am notoriously squeamish and have a phobia of all things medical. In this age where all doctors have been replaced by android diagnosticians, the thought of being poked and prodded by a machine does little to quell my anxieties. Part 4. Following our first meal of indistinguishable fungal meatloaf in the immense Lambda 56 dining hall, we are unceremoniously herded towards the medical assessment centre at the heart of this sprawling, nightmarish facility. The Institute is more than just a building. It's an entire city, housing over 100,000 souls who have been discarded by society. It's a concentration camp in all but name, built to cheaply house the so-called climate vandals, whose assets have been confiscated to fund the relentless cleanup of a dying world. The place is a brutalist monstrosity, an organic insect hive made of grey brick, metal poles and a tangled web of cables and rails. It stretches out endlessly in every direction, like the back end of a hospital that's been cobbled together with an airport's leftover parts. There isn't a single gesture towards aesthetic considerations, as if the very concept of beauty has been strangled, leaving behind nothing but a soulless, utilitarian nightmare. It's as if the muses themselves have died, their final breaths extinguished in this concrete wasteland. Our journey to Lambda 4, the section housing the examination area, is a grim reminder of the facility's staggering scale. We are packed into a rickety tram system that rattles and groans as it traverses the vast reaches of this monstrous complex. The corridors stretch on endlessly, winding and splaying out in a never-ending maze of tunnels and annexes, like a giant rat's nest designed by a madman. The design is brutally functional, with no thought given to the comfort or well-being of the residents. It's as if every inch of this place is an attestation to the death of humanity, replaced by cold efficiency. As we step into the examination area, my nostrils are immediately assaulted by the overwhelming stench of antiseptic disinfectant that pervades every inch of the space. The acrid odour is suffocating, seeping into my skin and settling heavily in my lungs like a noxious fog. The walls are a sickly shade of grey, as if even the paint is weary of its existence. Pipes and wires snake along the ceilings and floors, their incessant hum adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The shuffling of feet and the faint murmurs of the other 111 patients echo throughout the room, blending into a monotonous drone, like wasps trapped in a jar. The space is cold and clinical, devoid of any warmth or humanity. It feels like a place where hope comes to die, where the only thing that matters is the relentless march of procedure and protocol. As I stand there taking it all in, I try to make light of the situation, because what else can I do? I imagine the place as some kind of twisted amusement park for sadists. Welcome to dystopia land, where your dignity is the price of admission. But the joke falls flat, even in my own mind. The laughter I'm trying to summon dies in my throat, replaced by that gnawing sense of despair that keeps creeping in, no matter how hard I try to shake it off. I glance around at my fellow inmates because, let's be honest, that's what we are, watching them shuffle hesitantly in their ill-fitting examination gowns. They look like a bunch of school children forced into some cruel mandatory checkup, except these children are all over 80 and the gowns do nothing to protect their dignity. Cramped into cubicles that are barely big enough to turn around in, they fumble with the ties, trying to cover as much of themselves as possible. It's like a scene from a farcical play, except no one's laughing and the only thing we're queuing up for is humiliation. I try to distract myself, as I always do, by thinking of one of the complex mathematical problems that's occupied my mind for the last 6 years. But today, even they seem to have turned against me. I start with something simple, trying to calculate the prime factors of a large number in my head, but the numbers refuse to behave. They slip and slide, evading my grasp like mischievous children who've decided they're done playing nice. I push harder, trying to force them into the neat, orderly patterns that usually bring me comfort, but they only grow more erratic, flipping and twisting into shapes that don't make sense. It's as if the numbers themselves are tired of helping me, tired of being my escape route. They seem to be rebelling, and for a moment I swear they're mocking me, turning into nonsensical equations just to spite me. I can almost empathize with them. After all, who wouldn't get fed up in a place like this? Even the numbers, it seems, have had enough of this banal, soul-sucking environment. It's absurd, but I find myself identifying with them. Maybe we're all in this together. The numbers, the patients, even the faulty androids that clank around the halls pretending to be helpful. And somehow, that thought makes me feel just a little bit better. Because if even the numbers are struggling to make sense of this place, then maybe I'm not as lost as I feel. I take a deep breath, trying to steel myself for the ordeal ahead, hoping that I can emerge from this examination with at least a shred of dignity intact. But as I glance down at the nonsensical jumble in my head, I can't help but think that might be a lot to ask. The 14 doctors are androids. their metallic features glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. Their movements are precise, each unnerving gesture making me feel jumpy. They are like something out of a nightmare carnival. They remind me of the old automaton exhibits at a fairground, those eerie, jerky figures designed to scare children and unsettle even the bravest of adults. But these aren't just creepy curiosities. They're the ones tasked with our care, which makes their cold, clinical personalities all the more disturbing. Each one of these horrible doctors is equipped with an array of sensors that pulse with an eerie bluish glow, scanning us with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. Their eyes, if you can even call them that, are nothing more than dark, vacant lenses, devoid of any warmth or humanity. It feels like being watched by an alien abductor, something that's studying you not with curiosity, but with cold, calculating indifference. There's no comfort in the fact that these androids are put together with the latest technology, no sign of the mismatched spare parts and duct tape I half expected. In fact, their flawless construction only adds to how creepy they are. Everything about them is too perfect, too precise, as if they were built with one purpose in mind, to strip away any last vestige of humanity and replace it with something metallic, efficient, and utterly devoid of compassion. The nurse, barely more than a child herself, struts around the room in her oversized uniform, barking orders like she's running boot camp. The uniform, 2 sizes too big, sways with every exaggerated movement as she glares at the elderly patients, her voice sharp and grating. "All right, people, move it! I don't have all day to wait for you to shuffle around. Let's go," she snaps, her eyes narrowing as she spots someone moving too slowly for her liking. She's got the air of someone who thinks her drill sergeant would be proud, but all I see is a girl playing dress-up with no idea how to treat another human being with respect. Eventually she calls out my name, "Roisín O'Connor?" Her tone is brimming with impatience, as if I'm the one wasting her precious time. I hesitate, half hoping she'll just skip over me, but no such luck. She calls out again, louder, more sarcastic. "Roisín O'Connor, are you deaf or just slow?" I push myself up from the cold metal and bamboo chair with my right hand, using my left to cover my naked backside as best I can. The room feels like it's closing in around me, the sterile air thick with the scent of antiseptic. "No need to be shy, Roisín dear," the nurse coos, her voice suddenly saccharine and false. "We've seen it all before, haven't we, lads?" She glances over at Padar, who's flushed a deep shade of red and is now staring intently at his bare feet on the rubber floor. "Pervert," she mutters under her breath in his direction, loud enough for me to hear. A surge of anger floods through me, hot and fierce. I meet her gaze with as much steel as I can muster. "Oh, I'm sure you've seen it all, dear. But I'd watch that tone if I were you. Respect your elders and all that. Didn't they teach you that in junior infants?" She rolls her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Just stand still and let the doctors do their job," she snaps, her earlier faux sweetness vanishing in an instant. I glance at the android doctors, their metallic features glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. They're unsettling enough on their own, with their sensors glowing ominously and blade-like instruments gleaming as they extend from their arm ears. They look like something out of a twisted fairground exhibit, automatons designed to scare the wits out of children and frighten the elderly. "And what a job these gombines are doing," I mutter sarcastically, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "What's next, dear? A lobotomy, perhaps? Or are we just here to be weighed, measured, and humiliated one by one?" The nurse's lips curl into a smirk. "Just following orders, Granny. Now, stand still unless you want me to call in one of the androids to hold you down." There's something dark and primal that rises in me then. A crone's feral instinct that wants nothing more than to hex her, to teach her a lesson she'll never forget. The numbers that usually comfort me twist and writhe in my mind, and I feel the urge to cast them at her like a curse. But I bite my tongue, forcing myself to retain a semblance of composure. "Oh, don't trouble yourself," I say, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I wouldn't want to inconvenience you. I'll stand perfectly still just as you've asked. But remember this, child. What goes around comes around. You might find yourself in my shoes one day, and I can only hope someone will treat you with the same care you've shown us. Her smirk falters slightly, but she quickly recovers, waving me off dismissively. Yeah, if I live long enough, given the state of the planet you golden oldies left to us. That stung. As she bosses me all the way to the cubicle labelled Medical Suite 13, the rage simmers just below the surface, which has now been augmented with a layer of guilt. I can feel the last vestiges of my dignity slipping away. But I hold on to my anger, using it as a shield against the fear that threatens to consume me. And in my mind, I picture the numbers twisting into spells, hexes that I mentally cast at the nurse and the cold, unfeeling machines that surround me. But I know it's a powerless gesture, and I know I am completely and utterly unable to do anything about this horrible situation. Not just the situation at hand, but everything. The android doctor's eyes seem to glint with an unsettling, otherworldly intelligence, its gaze fixed on me as if it's not just scanning my physical body, but probing deep into something far more private. I can't shake the feeling that this machine is trying to peer into the depths of my soul to uncover every hidden thought and secret I've ever buried. A tiny voice in my head tells me I'm being neurotic, that no human, let alone a machine, can see inside my mind. But the android's eerie, unblinking stare unsettles me more than I'd like to admit. With an entitled, shrill attitude, the android doctor begins its interrogation. "Why haven't you had children?" it demands, its tone lacking any semblance of bedside manner. I blink, taken aback by the audacity of the question. "Excuse me," I say, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I didn't realize that was part of my medical history. What's next? Asking why I didn't pursue a career in synchronized swimming?" The android doesn't miss a beat. "Have you ever been an alcoholic or a drug addict?" I roll my eyes. "Only if you count the time I got tipsy on sherry at my cousin's wedding 50 years ago. And no, I didn't end up in rehab, in case you're wondering." The android's tone sharpens, clearly unamused. "Have you ever experienced psychotic episodes?" "Only when dealing with bureaucratic Egypts and nosy machines," I quip, crossing my arms over my chest. "Why? Do you diagnose sarcasm as a symptom of psychosis?" The android pauses, its lenses narrowing as if it's reassessing me. "Have you ever engaged in illegal medical activities?" it continues, completely unfazed by my attempts to derail the conversation. "Do I look like a back-alley surgeon to you?" I retort, trying to keep the rising irritation out of my voice. "The only thing I've ever illegally removed is a splinter from my thumb." The android's sensors flare, and I can practically feel it growing more hostile. "Your responses are off-topic and irrelevant. Non-compliance will result in disciplinary action." I lean back, smirking slightly. "What's the punishment? A strap across my hands? A timeout in the corner? Or do you just plan on boring me to death with more of these delightful questions?" The android's voice drops, cold and threatening. "Failure to comply will result in a reassessment of your cognitive function and possible isolation for further examination." Gaslighting. I swallow hard, my sarcasm faltering for just a moment. I've pushed it too far and I know it. The last thing I want is to be subjected to more of this mechanical monstrosity's care. I take a deep breath and force myself to play along. "Fine," I say, my tone still laced with irritation. "Ask your questions, Dr. Tin Can. I'll answer, but don't expect me to enjoy it." The android resumes its interrogation, now asking about every ailment and condition imaginable, probing into every corner of my life as if it's determined to find something incriminating. I grit my teeth and answer each question, resisting the urge to snap back with another sarcastic comment. "Do you have any history of cardiovascular disease?" it asks. "No, but if you keep this up, I might develop one," I mutter under my breath. "Have you ever had any issues with your liver or kidneys?" Both are intact, thanks for asking, I reply curtly, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. I reckon, though, that my bile is rising. Are you currently on any medication? Only the patient's pills I wish I had taken before this conversation, I mutter, feeling my frustration boiling over. The android doesn't seem to care about my growing anger. It continues its invasive questioning, oblivious to the fact that it's stripping away every modicum of my privacy and humanity in the process. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the questions cease. The android moves on to the physical examination, jabbing, prodding, and poking with its cold, metallic instruments. Each touch feels like a violation, a reminder that to this machine, I'm just another body to be processed. As it attaches sensors and needles, I wince at the sharp pain, trying to block out the gasps and cries coming from the other medical suites. I focus on my own experience, reminding myself that I've survived worse. But deep down, I can't help but feel a sense of helplessness. I never envisioned this kind of suffering in my elder years, and the reality is far more brutal than I could have imagined. When the android finally steps back, its task complete, I exhale slowly, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. My body may have endured the examination, but my spirit has taken a beating. As I dress and prepare to leave, I glance back at the android, its sensors dimming as it powers down. Thanks for the nice chat, Doc, I say, my voice dripping with irony. Let's do this again soon. The android doesn't respond, of course. It simply stands there, an unfeeling, unblinking automaton, waiting for its next victim. As I walk out of the medical suite, I can't help but think that in this place the machines aren't the only ones losing their humanity. Upon completion of the medical evaluation, I'm almost relieved, almost, until I realise there's another hurdle to jump. We're required to queue up once more to obtain a physical copy of our evaluation. As if enduring that dehumanizing examination wasn't enough, now we're subjected to the whims of bureaucratic absurdity. The nurse, who's now seated herself behind a desk with all the self-importance of a court magistrate, is distributing our evaluations from a slot in the wall. She holds each one up like a prize, glaring at us with that same condescending smirk. The evaluations are printed on individual sheets of eco-friendly A4 bamboo paper, because of course they've got to remind us how green they are while they strip us of our dignity. It's a curious contrast in this era, dominated by screens and tablets, and frankly, it just feels like another layer of ridiculousness. Here's your evaluation, the nurse announces as I step up, waving the paper in front of my face like she's handling some sacred document. According to Regulation 231A of the Elderly Healthcare and Compliance Act, all residents must receive a printed version of their medical evaluation. She says it like she's quoting the law from memory, complete with the name and number of the regulation, as if she were a junior lawyer straight out of law school. The smugness in her voice is almost unbearable. Well, aren't you well versed in the law? I say, dripping with sarcasm as I take the paper from her. I'm sure the legal world is mourning the loss of your talents. Her eyes narrow and I can see a flicker of anger cross her face. You're skating on thin ice, Roisín, she warns, her voice sharp. Am I? I reply, giving her my best innocent look. I didn't realise quoting the law was so dangerous. She leans forward, her expression darkening. You think you're clever, don't you? I'll be writing your name down for this, and you know what that means. You'll be hearing from Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan. I raise an eyebrow, pretending to be intrigued. Oh, really? And what will that wagon do to me? Will she recite another regulation? Perhaps deliver a lecture on the history of bamboo paper? The nurse's lips press into a thin line and she pulls out a small notebook, scribbling furiously. You'll find out soon enough, she snaps, her voice shaking with anger. Now, where have I heard that phrase before? Oh, I'm quaking in my boots, I say, deadpan. Will she be sending me a strongly worded letter? Or will there be a dramatic reading of my offences? She ignores me, finishing her note with a flourish and tucking the notebook away like she's just signed my death warrant. Consider this your final warning, Roisín. I take the evaluation, glancing at it briefly and then look back at her. You know, you might want to attach a dictionary to this report. It's full of spelling errors. I'd hate for Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan to see such shoddy work. The nurse's face turns an even deeper shade of red, and she opens her mouth to retort, but I don't give her the chance. I turn on my heel and walk away, the ridiculous evaluation in hand, leaving her fuming behind her desk. As I sit on the tram back to Lambda 56, I decide to read my medical report to pass the time. As my eyes scan the misspelled words and bizarre conclusions, I can't help but be astounded. The absurdity of it all is almost too much to bear. But before I can fully digest the ridiculousness of what I'm reading, I start to hear nervous giggles from my companions. One by one, they begin to open their own reports and the giggles turn into outright laughter. The tension from our earlier ordeal starts to lift, replaced by a shared sense of incredulity and amusement. "What the hell is fart mitigation?" Padar shouts, his voice cutting through the noise of the tram. His question is met with a chorus of laughter, the kind that only comes from people who've been through hell and are just grateful to find something to laugh about. "Well," I say, trying to keep a straight face, "you do know that your farts are a greenhouse gas. I suppose it means we're supposed to hold them in until we explode." "Or maybe we're supposed to install mufflers," Sister Anne chimes in, grinning from ear to ear. "You know, to keep things quiet." It doesn't take long for the absurdity of the situation to sink in, and soon the entire tram is echoing with laughter. The ridiculousness of it all, these high-tech, outrageously expensive android doctors equipped with the most advanced gadgets and gizmos, only to churn out reports filled with nonsensical gobbledygook, hits us like a punchline to a bad joke. It's as if we've all collectively realised that the Emperor has no clothes. The whole medical charade is just that, a dehumanizing facade rather than anything real or effective. As we pass the reports around, pointing out the most glaring errors and ridiculous recommendations, the laughter becomes contagious. It's not just about the fart jokes anymore, it's about the sheer incompetence of a system that prides itself on efficiency and technology, yet fails spectacularly at delivering even a shred of human decency or accurate medical advice. I can't help but chime in with my own observation. "Well, I'm not surprised," I say, shaking my head. Medics have always been known for their bark being worse than their bite. They love to puff themselves up, overestimating their efficacy and importance. But this takes the cake. The others nod in agreement, still chuckling as they read through their own ridiculous evaluations. It's as if we've all suddenly seen through the facade and realised that, despite all the shiny gadgets and advanced technology, the whole operation is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. "You know," one of the men says, his eyes twinkling mischievously, "I bet I can fart louder than anyone here." "Oh, you're on," another man replies, puffing out his chest in mock bravado. And just like that, a spontaneous fart the loudest competition breaks out. The men, clearly relishing the chance to act like kids again, lean forward, concentrating on their efforts. Each attempt is met with whoops of encouragement and playful jabs, the laughter growing louder with every passing second. But then, one man's face suddenly pales, and his laughter cuts off abruptly. The rest of us look over, realising with horror and a touch of morbid amusement that he's clearly mistaken his effort for something else entirely. The tram falls into an awkward silence, the mood shifting from carefree to sombre in an instant. We all exchange glances, trying to suppress our laughter out of respect for the poor soul who's just had an unfortunate accident. "Well, that's after killing the mood," Padar mutters, shaking his head. "Best not to push our luck," I say, trying to restore a bit of dignity to the situation. "Let's leave the fart competitions to the professionals, shall we?" The rest of the journey is spent in a subdued silence, the earlier levity replaced by a quiet reflection on just how absurd and bleak our situation really is. But for those few moments, we manage to forget our troubles and laugh together, And for that, I'm grateful. Part 5. Day 4 at Swaifnas, Nehuila begins innocuously enough. I peer out of my tiny window and note that the sky is shrouded in a heavy veil of grey and there's an ominous chill permeating the air. Today, I'm riddled with rheumatoid symptoms that seem to flare up in response to the sudden temperature drop. As I wait in a queue for the restroom, my thoughts spiral into an obsessive analysis of the surrounding architecture, fixating on the sharp angles and geometric shapes that comprise it. A young male orderly, who looks like he's barely hit puberty, maybe 15 years old if I'm being generous, approaches with a hurried, almost frantic energy. But then again, with everyone on Gerontard these days, who knows? He could very well be 30, trapped in the perpetual bloom of adolescence. It's a disconcerting thought, really, this agelessness forced upon us all. Still, he's a rare sight around here, being fully human, which for some reason makes him seem almost exotic in this sea of mechanical monotony. "Hurry up, lady," he says with an air of authority that doesn't quite match his boyish appearance. "You wouldn't want to miss your eating shift." He has a Cork North Side accent. I raise an eyebrow, unable to resist a sarcastic quip. "Eating shift? You make it sound like we're farm animals being herded to the trough. It's called breakfast, you know." He pauses, a slight blush creeping up his cheeks as he registers my words. "Well, breakfast, yes. But still, you wouldn't want to be late," he stammers, clearly flustered. I can't help but tease him a bit more. "Oh, I see. Wouldn't want to miss out on the culinary delights of the day, would we? What's on the menu? Rubbery eggs or the infamous fungus loaf?" He chuckles nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "You've got me there. I suppose the cuisine isn't exactly 5-star, but it's, filling." I lean in a little, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You wouldn't happen to know where they hide the real food, would you? A jambon, perhaps? Maybe a decent cup of coffee?" He grins, clearly enjoying the banter. "If I did, I'd be sneaking some for myself, but I'm afraid we're all stuck with what's on offer." "Pity," I sigh theatrically. "I guess I'll just have to settle for the eating shift then." He laughs, the sound youthful and genuine, but then something shifts in his expression. The flirtatious ease of the moment seems to hit him all at once, and he abruptly straightens up, his face turning a deeper shade of red. "Right, well, I'd better get back to my duties. Can't keep the boss waiting." I smirk, watching him retreat in a hurry. "Careful now, don't want Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan after you." He shoots me a sheepish grin over his shoulder before scurrying off, clearly rattled by the sudden realization that he'd let himself get a bit too comfortable. I shake my head, amused by the brief, unexpected flirtation, and head off to face whatever culinary horrors await in the dining hall. We gather for breakfast, our meal commencing just as the first tendrils of wind begin to pummel the edifice, causing the building to shudder in its foundation. Gazing out the windows, the once benign sky now bears a hue of malevolent grey. Without warning, a downpour ensues, pounding relentlessly against the roof and windows with a terrible force. I try to calculate the velocity and trajectory of each individual droplet, but the cacophony renders my efforts futile. The storm intensifies, the howling wind morphing into a pack of ravenous wolves, the rain hammering against the walls with a barrage of bullet-like ferocity. The roof's shingles are ripped away, and water begins to seep through the ceiling, dripping down on our heads as we attempt to consume our breakfast. A pitiful offering of polystyrene toast, grey porridge, and sickly and mildly sour oat milk. Southspot 56 surely has only the culinary imagination of an amoeba, I think to myself. The power sputters erratically, causing the lights to flicker and machinery to stutter. I endeavour to generate an image of the algebraic equation governing the building's electrical flow, but the storm's tumultuous clamour proves an insurmountable distraction. As the day trudges on, the storm outside evolves into a monstrous force, the wind whipping with a ferocity that feels like it's tearing at the fabric of the world. Rain slashes against the windows with a violence that makes the whole room shudder. The cacophony is unbearable, so I retreat into the only sanctuary I have left, my mind. I start with prime numbers, ticking them off in my head like old friends. 2, 3, 5, 7. But as the hurricane grows louder, so does my mental arithmetic, spiraling into more complex territories. I leap to quadratic equations, solving them in rapid succession, discriminants whirling around as the noise outside crescendos. But even that's not enough to keep the chaos at bay. My thoughts veer off into the empire of subatomic physics. I begin mentally rearranging Schrödinger's wave equations, trying to predict the impossible with every bolt of lightning that cracks the sky. My mind starts racing, jumping to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, as I wonder how much the storm's velocity is influencing its position. Or maybe it's the other way around. The concept of energy pops into my head and I find myself feverishly calculating E equals mc squared. Mass and energy oscillating in my thoughts as the room feels like it's spinning with the force of the equations. I catch myself pondering the chaotic nature of the storm itself, how the Lorentz attractor might map its path, how the variables in the Navier-Stokes equations could describe the flow of the wind and rain outside. My thoughts are a frenzy of symbols and functions, equations cascading like the raindrops outside. Newton's laws, Maxwell's equations, everything colliding in my head in a whirlwind of abstract thought. And then, suddenly, it hits me. I'm not just lost in thought. I'm having a full-blown brainstorm, a frenetic mental storm that's nearly as chaotic as the hurricane raging outside. I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Perhaps it's time to admit that I've thought myself into a corner. Maybe I'm better off taking a nap before my brain collapses under the weight of all this abstract nonsense. With a sigh, I let go of the equations, releasing them back into the ether and close my eyes. A nap seems like the most sensible solution to this particular problem. While some of us attempt to remain resolute, playing cards or watching films in each other's company, others succumb to their mounting dread, cowering in their rooms, praying fervently for the storm's swift resolution. Later on, after my nap, I try to comfort them, offering an analysis of the atmospheric pressure and wind speed, extrapolating the probabilities and potential duration of the storm's wrath. As the day dwindles to a close, the storm relents, the sun peeking through the retreating clouds. We emerge from our rooms, surveying the ruin and devastation wrought upon the institution. A tangible feeling of dread fills the air, heavy and foreboding, like the prelude to a looming disaster. The storm begins to subside, its furious rage finally relinquishing its hold on the world. The scene that greets us outside is one of destruction and devastation, a wasteland wrought by the tempestuous storm. The facility is scarred with debris, littered with broken branches and shattered glass, like a battlefield after a horrible battle. Metal adornments, communication aerials, and the paraphernalia of the building are bent and twisted, their once functional and regal forms now stooped and haggard. Some spark like giant mangled robots in the wind. We have been warned to remain within our quarters, but I, a disobedient and curious soul, dare to venture out of the wretched annex that contains me towards a small concrete seating area. All I want to do is to have a look around. The air is thick with the pungent scent of damp earth and rotting leaves, mingled with the acrid smell of burnt wires and electronics. The ground beneath my feet is treacherous, coated in a slick layer of mud and debris. I move with caution, like a tightrope walker, my feet gingerly seeking purchase to avoid slipping and tumbling down. The staff is oblivious to my presence, their focus absorbed by the Herculean task of cleaning up the wreckage left in the wake of ecological destruction. The human workers bear the weariness of those who have fought long and hard in a brutal battle. The robots and androids perform their tasks with a single-minded determination, their mechanical features impassive as they diligently toil in concert with their human counterparts. Together, they labour to heal the wounds inflicted upon the natural world, like a team of surgeons striving to save a patient in critical condition. As I look around over the devastation, an overwhelming sense of unease and apprehension takes hold of me. They will blame us, I realise. We, the climate vandals, are the source of this catastrophic instability, and it seems to worsen with each passing day. My generation and those before us recklessly consumed fossil fuels and ravaged the earth for resources. We were aware of the harm caused by plastic waste in our oceans, yet we did nothing. We recoiled in horror at the sight of vast islands of plastic waste floating in the sea, suffocating porpoises, dolphins, and whales, causing them to vanish from the earth. We are indeed the climate vandals they accuse us of being. We stood idly by as corporate greed and mindless pursuit of wealth despoiled the natural world. It is no wonder that the present generation is so enraged at us. I'm about to turn back when I hear a faint, plaintive mewling. I look down and spot a tiny kitten, its little nose poking out from beneath a pile of debris. Without thinking, I hurry over and scoop it up, cradling the small creature in my arms. "Leave that there," a harsh electronic voice commands from behind me. I turn to see an android doctor, of all things, busy with the cleanup, the same android that had earlier examined me, no less. It seems almost absurd to see it handling manual labour instead of whatever it is they do in their sterile medical suites. "Well, look who's slumming it," I say, unable to resist a bit of sarcasm. "Shouldn't you be diagnosing something or poking people with sharp instruments, doctor?" The android's sensors flicker as it processes my comment, clearly unamused. "Your sarcasm is noted and irrelevant. You should be in your quarters. Do you not have ears?" I bristle at its tone. Oh, I have ears, all right. They just tend to shut off when commanded by condescending gobshites. "What's the matter, doctor? Manual labour too taxing for your circuits?" The android's metal fingers twitch as it drops its bundle of wires and turns to face me, its blue sensors glowing with that cold, dispassionate light. "This is not your concern. Return to your quarters immediately." I hug the kitten closer, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "And what if I don't? What are you going to do? Diagnose me with a bad attitude? Maybe prescribe me some humility?" "Leave the feral animal. Now," the android snaps, its voice modulating to a sharper tone. "Return to your quarters as previously instructed. Non-compliance will result in disciplinary action." "Oh, leave it off, you tin-pot langer," I retort, flipping the android off with a defiant gesture. I don't know what possesses me to be so bold. Maybe it's the ridiculousness of the situation, or maybe I've just had enough of being ordered around by a glorified vacuum cleaner. For a moment, the android seems to freeze, as if computing my insubordination. Then, one of its medical blue lights switches on with an ominous hum. The light casts a harsh glow across the kitten and me, and I suddenly feel a jolt of fear. The android steps forward, its movements precise and deliberate, the blue light intensifying. Realizing I might have pushed too far, I instinctively loosen my grip on the kitten and it leaps from my arms, darting off behind a grey wall. The android sensors track the kitten for a moment before fixing back on me. I swallow hard, my bravado evaporating. "Return to your quarters," the android repeats, its voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. This time I don't argue. With a final glare, I turn on my heel and head back inside, feeling the sting of defeat. The rage inside me simmers, but I know better than to push my luck any further. As I retreat to my wretched little cell, I mutter under my breath, "Do I not have ears? Do I not have ears?" The sting of the reprimand lingers, and I can feel the anger growing inside me, but at least I didn't make it easy for the damned machine. Part 6. Later, as I lay restlessly in my bed, besieged by insomnia, a memory ambushed me. It was a newscast from the year 2054, which was the harbinger of all the ensuing accusations. Allow me to recount it here from my recollection. In the name of the People's Republic of Earth, I, android Judge Model Skywalker 23, shall present this indictment to the accused for their unmitigated disregard of the planet's ecological welfare and their relentless pursuit of personal gain. The accused are charged with numerous counts of climate vandalism, eco-terrorism, and planetary degradation, resulting in incalculable damage to our biosphere and the web of life that sustains it. The prosecution claims that their actions have led to the extinction of innumerable species, the devastation of ecosystems, and the destabilization of global weather patterns, giving rise to widespread famine, drought, and displacement. The evidence presented to this tribunal includes satellite imagery, air and water quality data, expert testimony, and eyewitness accounts, all of which unequivocally point to the culpability of the accused in the despoliation of our planet. The prosecution further contends that the accused, driven by their cupidity and avarice, have knowingly and recklessly exploited non-renewable resources, generated toxic waste, and emitted greenhouse gases, all of which have contributed to the impending ecological catastrophe that now threatens the very existence of humanity and androidanity. In this bleak indictment of the accused, who have wrought unimaginable harm upon our planet, it is my unenviable task to opine the following. They stand accused of destroying the natural habitats of countless species, wiping out forests, wetlands, and grasslands, thereby devastating the planet's biodiversity. To add insult to injury, the accused have engaged in a prolonged campaign of denial and obfuscation, promoting disinformation campaigns that have only worsened the crisis. The enormity of their actions and their impact on our planet and its inhabitants cannot be overstated, and the consequences of their actions will be felt for generations to come. The People's Republic of Earth demands that the accused be held accountable for their offences and that they take immediate and effective measures to address the ecological emergency confronting our planet. The prosecution implores this tribunal to mete out the strictest penalties possible, including hefty fines, restitution, imprisonment, and hor appreprut. Executian. En ordor ta sorve. As a warning to future generations that the annihilation of our planet shall not be tolerated. Then I fell into that blessed and elusive oblivion of sleep. Part 7. In those tumultuous days that followed that accursed letter from the government, a letter that all those who cross the threshold of their 8th decade are doomed to receive, the very purpose of my existence was lost to me. As an applied mathematician, I have spent a lifetime striving to decipher the secrets of science, particularly physics, through the medium of mathematics. But we all know that emotions can wreak havoc on our reasoning, especially when it comes to mathematics. Even seasoned mathematicians are not immune to the tumult of emotions, which can imperil their logical reasoning. Children in particular are vulnerable to this, their mathematical faculties frequently stifled by the traumas they have suffered. Addressing these emotional needs can prove crucial in unlocking their full mathematical potential. For myself, however, I have been blessed with a stable disposition, keeping my emotions under strict control, even in the face of adversity. But when I received the news that I was to be forcibly expelled from my own abode, seized by a fanatical eco-fascist regime, and consigned to Swijfnas Nehuila, all thoughts of my latest mathematical discovery were swept away in the darkness of despair. Only 2 short months ago, I had submitted my proofs to a preeminent mathematical journal for peer review, eager to share my findings with the wider scientific community. But now, the spectre of institutionalization hung over me, and with it the crushing realization that my proofs may have come to nothing. Alas, I put my hopes aside and spent the last few months fretting and bargaining with a reality that refused to yield, one that insisted on my eviction and internment in this camp. It was the power and communications outages that served as a reminder that I was awaiting news. Strangely enough, it was that sweet little kitten that I longed to rescue, but that had fled when that terrible android of a doctor barked instructions at me as if I were a disobedient domestic animal who had flouted the master's laws. That brought my discovery to mind. Later, when I had retreated to my cramped quarters, the kitten appeared at my window and gazed at me with its beautiful green feline eyes. Of course, my institutional window is barred shut. They fear that the residents might leap out of high-story windows or make a desperate bid for freedom. The kitten mewed, and I resolved to attempt its rescue the following day if I could. The sight of that charming little fluffball reminded me that there was still beauty in the world, and it was then that I remembered my proof. The mind reels at the implications of what I had discovered. It started with the Vlasov equation, a monstrous construct that I had been struggling with for weeks. I was studying the fine distinctions of plasma dynamics, desperate to find a solution to our dying world. And then, in the dead of night, it came to me. The Vlasov equation, a morass of complication, described the distribution function of a plasma. But what if I could describe that function in terms of its moments? My hands trembled as I clutched Boltzmann's equation, my heart pounding in my chest as I flipped through its pages. This equation was the key to unlocking the mystery of plasma dynamics. It described the behavior of a gas in terms of its moments, but what if that same principle could be applied to the Vlasov equation? The colours of the equations swished around in my mind, a knotty tangle of formulas and functions. My eyes darted from one page to the next, searching for the missing link. And then, as if by some supernatural force, I stumbled upon Maxwell's equations. Electricity crackled in the air as I made the connection. If my hypothesis was correct, there should be some way to relate the moments of the distribution function to the electric and magnetic fields in the plasma. It was a mind-blowing thought, but I was determined to prove it. The Grad-Shafranov equation loomed before me like a monster, taunting me with its sheer trickiness. It described the equilibrium of a plasma in a magnetic field. But more than that, it related the magnetic field to the current density. And that density, my dear friends, was related to the moments of the distribution function. I could feel my heart racing as the pieces fell into place. I knew I had to be careful, to test my hypothesis before claiming any great discovery. But as I worked through the equations, each piece fitting perfectly into the next, a sense of madness crept over me. Why has no one seen this before? Was this the discovery that would save our world? I am a prisoner to my own thoughts, knowing full well that once a genie is let out of a bottle, it can never be stuffed back. I was haunted by the implications of the negative externalities of what I had uncovered. The Vlasov equation, Boltzmann's equation, and the Grad-Shafranov equation. They are all connected. I am both exhilarated and terrified by this knowledge. What new horrors will it unleash upon the world, and will it be our salvation or our damnation? As I sit down with Maria in the dimly lit common area, I decide to tell her about my submission. Maria, I begin hesitantly, I submitted a mathematical proof to an academic journal just before I ended up here. Maria tilts her head, curiosity lighting up her eyes. A journal? Like a diary? Not quite, I say with a small smile. In the academic world, a journal is a publication where researchers and scholars share their findings with the wider scientific community. It's how new knowledge gets spread and discussed. These journals have something called an impact factor, which measures the importance and influence of the journal in its field. The higher the impact factor, the more prestigious the journal is. Maria nods, clearly impressed. So, this proof of yours, you submitted it to one of these high-impact journals? Yes, I say, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. I chose one of the most prestigious ones because I believed my proof could be extremely important. It's related to nuclear fusion, which could be a game changer in addressing the world's energy crisis. If my proof holds up, it could underpin a breakthrough in creating sustainable energy. Energy that could help restore our oceans and atmosphere, which we desperately need. Maria's eyes widen with admiration. Fair play to you, Roisín. So you're not just a pretty face. I let out a sigh, my gaze dropping to the floor. I was proud. But now I feel like a right Egypt. I've been so caught up in the misery of this place that I completely forgot about my submission, didn't even think to find a way to find out if they responded, if they accepted it, or if they had any revisions. But even if they did, what can I do? We don't have access to the internet here. It's part of our punishment, like being stuck in the old cells of Cork jail. How am I supposed to respond to emails or make corrections? Maria looks at me with deep empathy, her expression softening. That's awful, Roisín. You worked so hard on something so important, and now you're stuck here, unable to follow through. It's not fair. No, it's not, I say, shaking my head. But what's done is done. I wish I knew what they thought of it. What if it could actually make a difference and I can't do anything about it? Maria squeezes my hand gently, offering silent support. It's a tough spot, no doubt about it. But Roisín, you're after doing something amazing by creating that proof. No matter what happens, no one can take that away from you. Her words are kind and true, but they don't completely quell the gnawing worry inside me. You're very good, Maria. I suppose I'll just have to wait and see. Maybe someday, somehow I'll find out if it was all worth it. We sit in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. The world outside may be falling apart, but the possibility that I've contributed something meaningful, something that could help heal it, grows in my heart like a little green plant on a sunny windowsill. Maria and I sit there for a moment when Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan's voice blares over the overhead tannoy announcing that all residents of Lambda 56 are to report in the refectory for an address by herself. What does that heifer want now? I say. Maria shrugs. Part 8. Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan storms into the refectory flanked by her two android assistants, the residents now refer to as her goons. There is a fiendish smirk etched onto her face. Her frigid gaze scans us, the elderly residents, with open disdain as 1,000 of us huddle together, resigned to our fate. The storm has caused enough devastation, but O'Callaghan brings a hurricane of her own. With a voice as chilling as the icy winds outside, O'Callaghan announces, "Dear residents of Section Lambda 56, due to the recent storm and the destructive effects of climate change, the government has been forced to impose drastic measures to conserve resources. We can no longer tolerate climate vandals who continue to sap our resources. Thus, anyone who experiences a serious fall, shows signs of dementia, or severe cognitive decline or becomes incontinent will be subject to compulsory euthanasia by lethal injection." There is a long, stunned silence in the refectory. The only thing we can hear is Sowsbot, 56 whirring and clicking as it creates its next miracle of culinary science. So this is what she meant by steady state. My heart plummets at O'Callaghan's announcement. She knows this is a ruse to eliminate the burden of the elderly. The authorities have already seized our properties and now they want to confiscate our very lives. Maria's trembling hands betray her fear and fury, while Padar's face pales in horror. The usually demure Sister Anne leaps up. "How dare you!" she roars, leaping to her feet. "We are not responsible for the climate collapse. It is your generation that spawns this disaster with your misguided experiments and futile mitigation strategies, and now you want to euthanize us?" She crosses herself. O'Callaghan's grin widens with smug satisfaction. "Your generation had ample opportunity to rectify your mistakes. You failed. You are the ones who deny accountability for your actions. You are the ones who have wrought this catastrophe. And now you must pay the ultimate price. Maeve Byrne, who is sitting in the chair in front of me, turns to look at me, clearly not understanding the information we have just been given. She is a calm, cooperative and peaceful woman, and she suffers from mild dementia. She does not realise that this announcement is the harbinger of her fate. What did that lady say? Her face is gentle and serene, with soft features and a kind smile, and my heart goes out to her. I cannot bear to tell her the truth, so I just smile and say, "Your one is a wagon. She's lost the run of herself, so just ignore her." There I was, thinking that Maeve would be the first to go. Little did I know that it would actually be me. Then, on cue, Dr. Ms. O'Callaghan says, "Now, in more important news, all residents are to report for fart mitigation training to be held this afternoon after your lunch." She turns and marches out of the refectory, flanked by her goons. Some of my cohort are in tears, being hugged and comforted by others whose fate is identical. The scene is a tableau of despair and resignation, but I cannot find solace in it. Instead, I feel an overwhelming need to withdraw, to escape the collective grief and retreat into my own thoughts. I return to my shoebox of a room, eager to sulk in peace and count the prime numbers between 500 and 1,000, a mental exercise that, if nothing else, will keep the darker thoughts at bay. No sooner have I closed the door behind me than I notice the little kitten through the window. It's just perched there, looking directly at me with its wide, innocent eyes. The urge to scoop it up, to hold that tiny warm ball of fluff in my arms, is almost overwhelming. Just then, the door creaks open, and in walks one of those orderly androids, barging in without so much as a knock. "Just checking on your well-being," it drones, its synthetic voice devoid of any real concern. I glare at it, barely containing my annoyance. "My well-being was just fine until you decided to invade my privacy," I snap, crossing my arms. "Ever heard of knocking? Or is that not part of your programming?" The android tilts its head slightly as if trying to process my words. "Knocking is not required. I am programmed to ensure the health and safety of all residents." "Oh, how considerate," I reply, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I suppose your version of ensuring health and safety includes barging into people's rooms uninvited. How very humane of you." The android stares at me blankly, clearly not picking up on the sarcasm. "I am programmed to monitor all residents and provide assistance as needed." "Well, if you're so intent on helping, why don't you take my temperature?" "I'm feeling a bit chilly," I say, feigning a shiver as I come up with a quick plan. Without hesitation, the android produces a probe and steps forward. "Please remain still while I take your temperature." I nod, playing along. As it reaches out to place the probe in my ear, I deftly slip my hand into the fold of its uniform and pull out its lanyard. My heart races as I tuck it swiftly under my blouse, praying the android doesn't notice. "Your temperature is normal," it announces, retracting the probe with mechanical precision. "I will now proceed to check on the next patient." "Thanks ever so much for your diligent care, boy," I say sweetly, plastering on a fake smile. I feel better already. The android seems satisfied with my response, which is hardly a surprise given its limited intelligence. It turns and leaves the room, its clunky footsteps fading down the hallway. I wait a few moments to make sure it's gone, then breathe a sigh of relief, my hand trembling as it brushes against the lanyard hidden beneath my blouse. I head to the exit, heart pounding in my chest. A different android stationed there eyes me suspiciously, but I manage to distract him with an excuse about needing to use the jacks. As he waves me past, I slip into Lambda 57, clutching the lanyard tightly. The storm's aftermath has left debris scattered everywhere, but my focus is singular. Find that kitten. I scour the area until I spot it, trembling with fear beneath a cluster of leaves. I scoop it up, cradling it against my chest, feeling a surge of purpose and warmth as it nuzzles into me. But my moment of triumph is short-lived. As I turn to head back, my foot slips on the wet leaves and I crash to the ground, a sharp pain shooting through my leg. I try to move, but the agony is overwhelming. I lie there, helpless, watching in despair as the kitten scurries away, frightened by my fall. The sound of approaching mechanical footsteps fills me with dread. The android arrives and looks down at me. "Isn't it a queer day?" I say. I know my fate is sealed. As the darkness closes in, I can't help but wonder if my little act of rebellion was worth the cost. The last thought that crosses my mind is a hope that the kitten finds a better life, far away from this wretched place. Part 9. I awake in the treatment centre in Lambda 4. The same medical goon who had examined me on entry to the facility looms over me. "Oh, it's you, my GP," I say sweetly. I know my days are numbered, and it is likely that this will be the machine that imparts the kiss of death to me through the needle of a syringe. "What's after happening to me?" I ask, innocent as a lamb. The android extends that blue scanning eye that so frightened me when I was first examined. "We have set your leg, but we are awaiting confirmation from the Minister of State that the termination is to go ahead." Then he turns and leaves. I lie there for an hour before that horrible young nurse, the same one with the ill-fitting uniform, comes to my bed. I ask her what is going on. She tells me that there have been massive riots in Dublin and Cork following the euthanasia announcement. But the minister is adamant that we will go ahead. She seems genuinely sad, but quickly brightens. "In any case, we still have to treat you like any patient." "So badly, you mean?" I mutter to myself, resigned to the punishments I will receive for the crime of wanting to cuddle a kitten and then breaking a leg. As I lie there in the sterile, suffocating confines of the clinic, the reality of my situation presses down on me like a heavy weight. The pain in my leg is a constant reminder of my fall, but it's the gnawing uncertainty about my submission that truly torments me. My mind fixates on it, the need to know before I meet whatever fate awaits me, what they thought of my proof. Did it hold up? Did it make a difference? Or was it dismissed as irrelevant, a desperate attempt to contribute to a world that has long since moved on? I can't bear the thought of leaving this world without knowing, and the urge to access my email becomes overwhelming. When the nurse comes in to check on me, her face as impassive as ever, I decide to take a chance. "Nurse," I begin, my voice shaky but resolute, "is there any possible way that I can access my email before I go to my fate? I just need to know what the journal thought of my submission." She doesn't meet my gaze as she fiddles with the drip, her movements cold and robotic. "Sure you know for yourself," she replies, her tone flat and uninterested. "Residents aren't allowed near email." I feel a surge of frustration inside me. I'm running out of time, and this cold, bureaucratic response feels like the final insult. "But I'm a professor," I plead, trying to inject some urgency into my voice. "Surely you can make an exception. I'm on death row, for heaven's sake. What harm could it possibly do to let me check one email?" The nurse finally looks at me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Professor or not, the rules is the rules," she says, as if that settles the matter. "You don't get special treatment just because you had a fancy title." I clench my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This isn't about special treatment," I argue, my voice growing more desperate. "I need to know if my work meant something, if it made any difference at all. I'm not asking for much, just a few minutes to check my inbox." She sighs, clearly weary of the conversation. "The systems are down anyway," she adds, almost as an afterthought. "All of the communication networks are after cutting out because of the storm. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't let you access anything." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was prepared to argue, to beg if necessary, but this is something I can't fight. The reality that I might never know the outcome of my submission sinks in, bringing with it a deep, hollow ache. "So that's it?" I whisper, more to myself than to her. No email, no reply, nothing. The nurse, perhaps sensing my defeat, finishes adjusting my drip and gives a small, almost indifferent shrug. It is what it is. You're better off focusing on other things now. The only thing I have left is the unanswered question that will likely haunt me to my grave. Did my proof matter? And as much as I want to fight it, I feel the cold grip of despair tightening around me as I take a few of my final breaths that come to me as gasps of grief. The android doctor returns. The termination has been confirmed. You are a burden to the state, and your accident reflects the uncaring attitude of the majority of climate vandals. Tomorrow at 12 noon, sharp, I will be administering the termination chemicals. And thus, I am sentenced to death, as if it were the most ordinary thing. I think of all the people rioting, the few who care enough about the welfare of us climate vandals. I am visited by Pardar, Maria and Maeve, in addition to Sister Anne, who wears her veil for the visit and gives me her rosary beads to hold for the euthanasia. Soon you will be at peace, and this will all be over, she says kindly, but it is no comfort to me. Part 10. It is 11:55 and that goon of death arrives with his piercing multiphasic eye. I clutch the rosary beads and it feels as if I am looking at everything from a distance, as if I have already begun that ascension to the afterlife of which Sister so fervently speaks. The goon holds the syringe with the sharp needle and moves towards me, the sequence of events already mapped out in advance. His wheels squeak as he approaches me. "Would someone oil that thing's wheels?" I shout. Then he stops suddenly, interrupted by some signal within him. There is a long moment of pause and I look on the clock on the wall. It is 11:59. Then he reanimates. Now the syringe has been lowered and the needle retracted. "We have been notified by the Minister of State that your termination is to be terminated. It has come to the attention of the Tarnishta that you are now classified as state asset due to recent research you have conducted. This facility was not aware that your mathematical skills were of import to the climate crisis." Then he turns and leaves. My friends are delighted, and I feel profoundly relieved as I return to my room. My leg, once a source of terrible pain, heals quickly with the help of the medics. Despite their eagerness to get me out of the way, they manage to find drugs that hasten my recovery. The first medication they change is the gerontade, replacing it with a new drug called Youngnissil, which is apparently reserved for select patients. Within days, my leg is almost completely healed, with only a slight limp remaining from the inactivity. To my astonishment, my rheumatoid symptoms disappear and I notice that my back has straightened. Even more surprising, certain desires I thought long extinguished unexpectedly return, and those pesky hemorrhoids are now just a distant memory. 2 years have passed since that dark time and life has taken a turn I could never have imagined. My equations and mathematical proofs have become central to the eco-cleanup process. The seas have benefited greatly, with marine units now filtering out 60% more plastic than the previous month. Fusion reactors, which were once a distant dream, now dot the world's coastlines, powering gargantuan carbon sequestration systems. As a result, global temperatures have decreased by 2 degrees Celsius, and for the first time in many years, the North Pole is fully covered in ice. I'm being hailed as the most brilliant mathematician of all time, and have even been honoured with a Nobel Prize in mathematics. It's strange how one can go from being labelled a climate vandal one day to a climate hero the next. But I'm not complaining. Things have improved so much for us all. In a moment of pure serendipity, I find that rascal of a kitten again. I decide to name him Einstein, not just because of his wild hair, but because, like the great physicist, he's been a catalyst for change, albeit in his own mischievous way. Einstein played an instrumental role in the salvation of our planet, and I'm convinced that his presence brought me luck. I'm 82 years of age now, and I'm truly grateful to be alive in this wonderful year of 2062. The world has changed, and so have we. The area around Lambda 56 has been transformed into a beautiful garden, and most of the other areas are receiving the same treatment. This facility has become more of a place where the elderly are no longer seen as a burden, but as valuable members of society. Attention is now paid to human well-being, with the understanding that among us are geniuses capable of coming up with crucial solutions. Moreover, it turns out that the android doctors, with their failing processors, have been decommissioned, their cold efficiency replaced by more humane care. Hopefully, the new doctors have better report-writing skills. The facility itself is no longer a place of despair, but one of hope and rejuvenation. As I stroll through the garden with Einstein trotting beside me, I can't help but marvel at how life's darkest moments can sometimes lead to the brightest outcomes. Who would have thought that such a dreadful situation could turn around so dramatically? Yet here we are, alive, thriving, and, dare I say it, actually grateful for each moment. Don't get me wrong, I'm still as sarcastic as ever. Old habits die hard, after all. But I've found that these days I don't need sarcasm quite as much. Turns out having a cuddly companion and a bit of respect can do wonders for one's outlook. Who knew? The end.
This was a short story by Robert J. Fourie. If you would like to read more short stories by the author, please visit Amazon and order Exiles of Iron and Light. The author would appreciate it if you left comments on YouTube and ratings on Amazon. Thank you for listening.